All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to our panel, although it's more like roundtable kind of conversation, dialogue. My name is Eman Ghanayem. I'm the moderator of the panel. I'm an assistant professor of English here at USD. I started this year. Thank you so much for coming on, one of the last weeks of the semester, which is like a horrible time to do anything. And also, I think this is our last teach-in. We have done a total of 37. This is our 40th in 2 years. In 2 years, or that's just. So this is our 40th teach-in since November 2023. And from my knowledge, probably the most teach-ins on Gaza that happened since the beginning of the most recent genocide. Only because people are making me do this, and I'm also invested in doing this, but I'm advertising for my class in the fall because I have low enrollment and I don't want it to get canceled. It's my Palestine literature class, and we need to do that stuff in the classroom as well. It's called Reading Palestine. Please come and see me after if you want more information. I created the flyer because that's what I do when I procrastinate, and I created also this flyer. This is my contribution for the panel. The title of today's panel and our last teach-in in 2 years is Love in Colonial Times, Key Terms in Contemporary Feminist Solidarities. I am so grateful and honored and gifted to be in community with all of you today, and specifically with our panelists who are in many ways friends and relatives. I will introduce the speakers, but before doing that, I wanted to start with selections from a poem that really sets the tone for today's conversation. In 2014, in a rally for Gaza in Saxatoon, Cree poet and activist Erica Violet Lee wrote a poem for Palestinian women in the spirit of making connections. The poem is much longer than what I'm going to read, but these are the parts that stand out. We're half the world, but carry the rest of it on our backs. We both live in occupied territories, but what can I know about you, half a world away from me? You and me, we know violence, the pain of our mothers, the memories of this land. We share a history of being moved, removed, moved again, taken from our homes, and wondering if we'll ever go back. We've shared sleepless nights telling, retelling, telling again the stories they tried to take from us, trying to remember the ones they did. You and me were the resistance, and this is for the women who are told not to speak, not to write or read, not to dream or feel, but do it anyway. I want to share with you a description that we wrote for this panel to kind of explain what we're doing here today. The central focus of our conversation is solidarities created and inspired by decolonial feminisms that are deeply political, interconnected, and loving in their foundations and praxis. Our panelists today are grounded in their own values and vision for a world beyond colonization and its violence, and they will share with us key terms from their experiences that can carry us and have carried us through the atrocities and cruelty of the colonial state and its disregard for human life. Their perspectives will narrate histories and realities shaped by hardship and grief, but also many possibilities and hopes, all necessary for us to learn to withstand these times and cultivate the kind of care and courage that demands togetherness and community to grow. Our first panelist today is Katheryn Walkiewicz, or Katie Walkiewicz. Katie Walkiewicz is an associate professor of literature at UC San Diego, faculty director of the Indigenous Futures Institute, and an enrolled citizen of the Cherokee Nation. They are the author of Reading Territory, an amazing book, by the way. I highly recommend reading it. Reading Territory, Indigenous and Black Freedom, Removal in 19th Century State. An honorable mention for the American Studies Association's 2024 Laura A. Romero First Book Award. She is a scholar of Indigenous print culture, early Native literature, speculative fiction, and Indigenous horror, whose writing has appeared or is forthcoming in over a dozen academic journals and edited collections. Our second panelist is Amira Jarmakani, who's a professor of women's, genders, and sexuality studies and affiliated faculty with the Center for Islamic and Arabic Studies and LGBTQ+ studies at San Diego State University. Her book, An Imperialist Love Story, Desert Romances and the War in Terror, published by NYU Press in 2015, explores the crucial role of desire in perpetuating the imperialist war and terror. She also authored Imagining Arab Womanhood, the cultural mythology of veils, harems, and belly dancers in the US by Palgrave Macmillan in 2008, which won the National Women's Studies Association Gloria E. Inzaldua's book prize. She holds a 2024-2025 NIH fellowship, which probably has been impacted. It was terminated. Okay. To work on her current project. Hopefully you're working on your current project anyway. Which is titled Weapons of Mass Dissemination, that uses feminist data abolition frameworks to investigate how data is weaponized in the service of anti-Muslim and anti-Arab racism. She is co-editor with Pauline Hamsi, Vincent, and Louis Kankar of Sajlu Arab American, a reader in Swana Studies, and a series advisor for the Critical Arab American Studies series with Syracuse University Press. She has served as president of the Arab American Studies Association, board member for the Association of Middle East Women's Studies, and assistant editor for the Encyclopedia of Men and Islamic Cultures. She's an organizer with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, a core member of the Institute for the Critical Study of Zionism, and a supporter of the Palestinian Feminist Collective, or a supporting member. And our final panelist and colleague and friend, Marcelle Maese, who is, I should probably just read what you gave me, was raised in Los Angeles and Juarez by immigrant parents from Mexico and Tunisia. She arrived to the University of San Diego in 2013, where she is currently an associate professor of English and director of the Women's and Gender Studies minor. She is currently writing Chicanak's Poetics, Confession, Song, Criminality, and the Coloniality of Gender, a book manuscript that studies the relationship between song and confession, social and literary forms that historicize the colonial relation between legal redress and non-secular protest. Her popular education, libretto, Introduction to Chicana Feminisms, is forthcoming in 2025 as part of the book series. I'm gonna butcher the Spanish, but it's an amazing book and it's forthcoming in 2025 and everyone should read it. I guess I will do this here because it's easier to transition to that microphone, but our roundtable today is organized in a way where each of our guests is gonna share with us 3 key terms that they associate with what they perceive to be a feminist, global, intersectional, interconnected solidarity. And we will begin with Katie. Thank you all so much. Oh. If the room is too big to use.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, good, because I want to make sure everyone can hear me. Thank you, Eman, and thank Marcelle for having me here. It's just such an unbelievable honor to get to be here with all of you and to get to be in conversation with such incredible, brilliant people. And I just also want to express my gratitude. Eman and I have been I'm going to try not to cry friends for so long, and the fact that we get to both teach and work and love and struggle in San Diego feels very special to me. So I feel very appreciative to be here today. So I wanted to offer a little bit of context for the 3 words that I chose, and I'm going to try really hard not to, weirdly, I cried the other day when I read this quote to someone. It's like a cheap trick I use. It's a quote that I really like. Maybe it's being a literary scholar and like a sucker for language, but should I switch over there if I want to move my slides? Would you mind going to my first slide? So I cheated a little with my 3 words. Um, sorry, I'm bad. You did too? Okay, good. Okay, good. So I chose 3. I also blame TJ for this a little bit because he gave me permission. So no, you're great, I think.
Yeah, it's.
Are we in the link?
Eman?
No, it's okay.
You want to have this on the pink pieces? Yes, so that way you get.
I'm moving to even do like
I will see.
Could I have my first slide, please? I feel like I'm on a game show. No, sorry, the next one. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to share my 3 terms with you and then I'm going to return to them again. So I chose matrilineal, but I cheated and it has kind of other words that for me are really grounding it and are kind of clustered with it as well. Kinship, sustainability, and continuity. My second word I wanted to think with all of you is gratitude. And in that way, I'm really specifically thinking about joy, abundance, and mutual love. And then finally, reciprocity, a commitment to a life, curiosity, and difference. Let's see if I can. There we go. Okay, could I have my next slide? And so I wanted to also begin with this quote and then tell you a little bit about myself, because I think for me, this is a very powerful passage. It's the last passage from Miley Arvin. She's a Kanaka feminist monograph, and I've found it, at least for me, very powerful in guiding the way that I move through things and think about the kind of work that I do as a professor, but just also as a human being and as someone living in San Diego and wanting to be parts of struggle and trying to think about how to do that in ways that are ethical, constant, but also sustainable. And so if you'll indulge me, it is a little bit long, but I wanted to bring her words into the room because I find them personally very moving. And before I begin, she uses the word kapu, which I'm not Hawaiian, but as I understand it, is a way of describing like Hawaiian protocols and law, like Hawaiian custom. But she writes, what if we measured the success of our organizing, our research and writing, our relationships, and all our efforts towards decolonization in precisely these terms? Are we connecting here with there, the present with the ancestors? Are we keeping kapu and refusing what must be refused for our own freedoms, spirits, and bodies to be protected and loved? Indigenous feminists know that decolonization is never an overnight happening. It must be practiced and comprehended at Indigenous scales, both intimate and grand. Both our ancestors and our next generations share these lessons in a million ways. And while we march and protest and write against settler colonialism, there's also food to be, this is the part that gets me, there's also food to be made, children to bathe, elders to support. We fight not just to dismantle, but to create the conditions for maintaining these practices of caring for each other, for sustaining more life. Whatever our ongoing strategies against the logic of possession through whiteness may be, we must anticipate being unsettled. But we must also rejoice in the fact that such unsettling is part of the collective work we must do, caringly and carefully, to realize our interconnected, expansive, oceanic future. So I also wanted to bring this today because I tried to remember and think about the fact that San Diego is on the US-Mexico border. It's also Kumeyaay land, right? Kumeyaay people have been stewarding and caring for this place since time immemorial, but we're also connected to the Trans-Pacific. And so for me, this has been a really grounding quote. And so that was I kind of have 3 things I wanted to bring in today with my keywords. So if we could go to my next slide. I wanted to share a little bit about myself and some of the themes that Eman gave us, and actually in some ways it resonates with the poem you read as well. So I am a Cherokee Nation citizen, and my very first slide and then the background of this slide as well is my family's allotment land, which is The land that my family was granted by the federal government when Cherokee Nation was broken up into individual plots of land, which was basically an effort to break us, right, as a nation. And I share it for a couple of reasons. It's less than 2 hours from where I was born and raised, but I never went there until last May, almost exactly a year ago. But this is also as close as I can possibly get. So to even get remotely close, it's deep back, it's farmland. I've kind of marked some of our family's allotments in red for you. And for those of you who are from a coast and, you know, not from the tummy of the continent, I've also kind of given you a sense of like geographically where it is. Cherokee Nation is in connection to the state of Oklahoma, but also where it is within Cherokee Nation. So this was the closest we could get to this land. We made sure, though, that we also had a Suburban or a truck that we were driving with Oklahoma plates because we also didn't want to get shot, and it's the middle of the country. We couldn't stop for very long. This was about as long as we could stop to take the picture. But it was really moving to me to be both at a place that felt deeply familiar, but also a place I probably will never go. We have a sense we might be related to people who still live there, but we haven't forged those connections yet, if that's in fact the case. And it is actually, you know, that would be pretty remarkable because a lot of this land is now sort of like large, not as many family farms and larger agriculture. It's also literally on the border between the state of Kansas and Cherokee Nation. The road we drove out that's that way is literally one side is Kansas and the other side is Cherokee Nation. And I share this because I'm pretty convinced that one of the reasons that my family no longer has a relationship to this land is because of the ways we maintained our matrilineal ties. Cherokee people are, and most Southeastern people are matrilineal, which means that our kinship structures are really guided through our mothers and our grandmothers, and that is certainly true in my family. So if you'd go to the next slide. At some point, my family ended up moving to Tulsa for economic reasons, but they stayed, all of the mothers and grandmothers in my family stayed together. And even while they didn't have that relationship to that land, there were still things about my family that were strongly connected. And so I wanted to share a picture of some of my family with you to give you a sense of kind of the space where we moved through and some of the women in my family. So in the very front middle row is my great-great-grandmother. This was her, I think it was her sophomore year at the Cherokee Female Seminary. This was no, right in the middle, the one looking kind of sassy. Yeah, her like uninterested. It was basically the best education if you could get as a woman west of the Mississippi, no matter what kind of woman you were in the late 19th century. It's a complicated, female seminary has a very interesting history, but nonetheless, it was a really important space for women, many of whom would then go on to be teachers and educators in Cherokee Nation, right? And here on this side is her, Nellie, holding my mom in Tulsa. And she was my mom's mama. And so I think about this tension here and both the loss, but the joy that she felt in her life. She was born in Cherokee Nation in Indian Territory. She witnessed just extreme disruption and violence from the US federal government through the creation of the state of Oklahoma, the forced allotment of Cherokee national lands, and then their eventual move to Tulsa. But the thing I love here is just the joy you can see in her holding my mom, who's being very bad and excitable, right? And also the reading material all around her, including newspapers and things like that. And so those are some of the things that were really grounding my thinking. If I could go to my last slide. In some of the terminology I wanted to bring into the room today, because I've been thinking a lot about my own family's matrilineal and the loss, what was lost for us through aggressive attacks on matrilineal as Cherokee people, right? Because one of the important things that matrilineal did was it made sure everyone knew what their role was, what their place was in a community. But it was also really a social safety net. It was a way to make sure that everyone was cared for and protected. So I've also been thinking about this in terms of feminism, right? And the kind of matrilineal networks that for me are really important as someone who would consider myself a feminist who's been profoundly shaped by feminist thinking. And in my own work, I've tried to be guided by that in my research by thinking about what I call a matrilineal citational practice, which is to, as much as possible, cite and honor and appreciate the intellectual knowledge and contributions and sacrifices of Black and Indigenous women. So that's kind of what guided me to matrilineal. And then I think for me, gratitude is similar. I'm kind of on an abundance kick in 2025. I think this is a moment where we're meant to feel that there's increasingly less resources, that things are becoming more scarce and more dire. And while that is certainly true, and I don't want to minimize that, I also think about the importance of thinking about a space of abundance and the gifts and the contributions we still have to give each other. The ways that we can still love one another, the ways that we can still show up. They may not be rewarded monetarily, but there's power in kind of rejecting that anyway, right? And then the last word I wanted to offer up was the idea of reciprocity, which is sort of a different way for me to think about what solidarity means, right? It's not just, I try not to just think about it in terms of I recognize your struggle, but I recognize that we are in a mutual relationship with each other, and I am here to care for you as I know you care for me, and really being attentive and mindful of that. So that was kind of my little. I hope I did okay in time. Anyway, Widow, thank you.
I do. I have slides also. So also extend my thanks to Eman for bringing us together, which the beautiful flyer sort of communicates so much about the spirit of how we were brought together. I really appreciate it. Also to John Haleka for all of your work to create the whole teach-in series, and for everyone for being here. If maybe we should start on the second slide. So I'll let you know ahead of time that I went to my office to print out a 12-point font and some 18-point font so that I could pass them around. And this slide talks about providing that, but the printer not only wouldn't communicate with my computer, but it was out of toner. So I failed to bring hard copies, and I'm sorry for that. I did put, if you scan this QR code, you're going to get first descriptions of each slide. So if you like to back channel, there's extra for you on that. And then at the very bottom, you'll see there are tabs to the comments that I'll make. It's a little bit more than I'm going to say, so I apologize for that because I don't have time to say all of it, but I wanted to provide as many resources as possible and context. And then at the very bottom is the 18-point font. So thank you. I don't need to tell you what we're living through, nor can I clarify really how to live through it. All I can tell you, because it kind of felt like that was the prompt. It was overwhelming, to be honest. All I can tell you is where I have found solace, organizing both through modes of direct action and through art, poetry, writing, and other forms of truth-telling, sometimes all at once. What is life-giving about these activities is that they offer opportunities to struggle together, to process, transform, welcome grief and anger through connection and through action. So the way I cheated is that I was going to talk a little bit about love first, because love is what we are called to. It's the framing for this panel, but I wanted to talk a little bit about how I'm thinking about it. Particularly because our organizing often emerges out of a sense of urgency. It's been feeling that way for some years, or it's like we have to navigate seemingly endless crises. And a praxis of love is what guides and sustains it. When we talk about love, we have a particularly textured meaning in mind. Love grounds the rage and grief toward a purpose, total liberation. So what do I mean by that? One slide. One way is thinking about it as a discipline and a practice that we choose, even when it's incredibly hard and even though we cannot be certain it will save us. This is still from you can see in the slide descriptions, It's one page out of this phenomenal zine that came out during COVID called Asian American Feminist Antibodies. And I was just highlighting Kai Cheng Tom's I Hope We Choose Love, Notes from a Trans Girl's Notes from the End of the World, which say in part, there's a love here that might not save us at the end of the world, but that might make it possible to live through. It may be harder to believe in. It will be harder to live. I hope we choose it anyway. And then another way to think about this discipline of love and choosing it, or another way of thinking about love, is that it's a type of love that does not look away from unspeakable loss and devastation. In fact, it's deeply rooted in the realities of that loss. So here I'm thinking about Nadra Shalhoub-Kevorkian, who's, I have the screenshot of a podcast in which she gave some comments, and the title of the podcast was There's So Much Love in Palestine, because that's a comment that she made among many, but a kind of focus of her comments there, one, and so here's where you'll find more in the slide descriptions, and I'm not going to talk through all of this, but we could say more later. One is to note that she, after this podcast, was persecuted, essentially, not only censored and extremely repressed, but beyond by Israel. And there are many things we could say about that, but in part, the evidence that was given were that she made some comments about, she called for investigations of the allegations that Israeli women had faced mass sexual assault on October 7, 2023. And you may know there's been a massive campaign called Believe Israeli Women and many other things, but playing on the idea of believing women to persecute her, basically. And that's the thing that we could say a lot more about, because we could all take a lot of time discussing all the complexities of that. But it's the weaponization of that claim that resulted in her repression. What she was really talking about in the podcast and what those forces of oppression were really wanted to silence, was her analysis of Ashla'a, which she developed through a means of talking about the material importance of the body as we grapple with genocide. So she says the Arabic word ashla'a, meaning scattered body parts and dismembered flesh, is used as a repeatedly emphasized concept and concern voiced by Gazans. And she goes on to say that, in her analysis of that, she forces us to confront the material reality of flesh as devastatingly fragile. It's capable of being torn apart and of rotting, all of which is graphically indicative of the putrid, vile forms of dispossession of the genocide. But she also focuses on that to emphasize Palestinian resistance and sumud in the face of such unspeakable realities, and to highlight Palestinian dedication to life and love despite such devastation. So that's what leads her to say there's so much love in Palestine. So this is another way that we can think about love and how we're talking about it. Also wanted to mention, I wanted to bring in as many voices into the room as possible. So that's another part of what I would do throughout. Here I bring in Lara Albast, who is wrote a piece in which she's describing what it has been like to truth tell, basically, to witness, to talk to people, and to hear their stories, and then to write about them. And she tells about how she had been in touch with Hiba Zarut, how on October 11, Hiba had sent Laura shaky pictures. 2 of her children crouched on the balcony. One looked at the camera, eyes wide in terror. Behind them, a cloud of smoke from a nearby airstrike. And Hiba Zarut says, "I can't sleep from the fear. Pray for us." And Laura writes, "I prayed, and God took them anyway." So on October 13, Israel killed Hiba Zarut. And Laura goes on to talk about how that impacts her body and her and bodily. So what I want to say with that is that we're talking about a love that breaks us, that twists, from which we're rent asunder, and that nevertheless grounds us and guides our way of moving in the world. And this is all an aspect of love. The next slide is the Palestinian Feminist Collective's principle from the February month of the calendar. And this principle says, we uphold radical love as an act of liberation that grounds our collective resistance. It's both a militant defiance to colonial violence and a life-affirming revolutionary practice of building feminist futures. And the rest of it is in the document. If you want to read the rest of it, there's also a link to it. But the idea here is that it's both the militant defiance to colonial violence and the life-affirming revolutionary practice, the caring for elders, and all of it is inextricable. So my first actual word is cultivate. The image you're looking at is an image of my aunt tending an almond grove. It's spring, the trees are blooming, flowers that will grow into almonds, first fuzzy green fruits, and later the hard shell that can be cracked open to find loaves or almonds. This almond grove fern, this one in particular, it flourishes for two reasons. One, that the trees were grown from the seed, and that's because if you grow from the seed, the growth factor of the seed means that the roots will grow deeper and stronger. But it also flourishes because my relatives used grafting to facilitate the fruit blooming. And so the lesson that I'm sort of wanting us to think through is that both are necessary, both fidelity to the seed for its ability to grow strong, long roots, and an openness to grafting, which is a very long, I don't want to use the word ancient, but it's a long-standing practice to invite the kind of flexibility and creativity that will be resilient and that will remain. Also have up there, the word hub means love, probably many of you know, but I have also habbat qamah, which is a grain of wheat. So from this, I would say, and it'll lead to something else. The English phrase whole grain does not even begin to approach the complexity within qamah and the variations that proliferate from it. Wheat gives rise to flour, burghul, and other forms of sustenance. Classically, these forms emerge both from a process of riding on a board with stones to separate the wheat from the chaff, literally, then sifting and sorting, making flour from one part, reserving another part to elaborate on the varieties and sizes of burghul. The way you do that is to boil them, take them out to the roof, leave them to dry in the sun, rinse, wash, repeat. So I want to be clear that the process I'm describing here in the picture, it reflects my family's experience cultivating wheat, grapes, almonds, and other crops in southern Syria. But I'm highlighting the keyword cultivate to uplift the idea of cultivating life, the resistance born out of love of life and land. And there are two other examples that I wanted to quickly give. One on the next slide is also in Syria, but it's from Bana Ghadbian's Ululations from the Underground. And it depicts a creative action by a group that named itself Habbat Qamah, the grains of wheat, the name they adopted in order to continue protesting after being discovered by the Assad regime under another name. So it's a practice of like changing the name of the group. It reflects other kinds of practices like so-called flying protests and many other creative forms of protests that would be like dropping notes in the shapes of birds and things like this so people could find them, or writing things on money. Also to be able to spread the messages. So you can read on the up here or on the slides what it says. But the other example I wanted to give comes from Gaza. It's on the next slide, and it's from Leila Sharif. Both of these people that I've just mentioned are also in the Palestinian Feminist Collective. And she's written about the taboo as feminist praxis. And I give you the link in the document if you want to read the whole thing. But she talks about creating clay ovens. You can see the image on the left, an ancestral practice, and how, and this practice right now in Gaza to enable people to bake bread and sustain themselves. So that's my first word, cultivate. The second one is horizon. I begin here with Zain al-Sousa's poem. It's called Map of a New Cosmogony, Yellow. It's from her book, A Theory of Birds. I begin with this image poem because it beautifully depicts that there are no words. So like we had to come up with keywords, but I was like, what do you mean? Because it's really, there are no words really to grasp, a lot of what we're sort of talking about. And so for me, this poem does so much. It communicates also the sun of our struggle. And I just wanted to mention quickly that the word horizon, just so I give credit, came to me. I started thinking about it when I was reading Amy Bong's Migrant Futures. So you can see in the document, I give you a quote where I had started to think about it. But it got me thinking that of a horizon as a vanishing line that both exceeds and dissolves the demarcation of sky and ocean, like both always at the same time exceeding and dissolving, not a binary, not a fine demarcation, right? Constantly being a space of non-boundary, non-destination, creating itself. And I also started thinking about how the horizon gains definition at dawn and dusk, when the sun's rays create landscapes of color across the sky. Particularly dawn or fajr is especially meaningful. The time just before the dawn we could think about as signifying potential, just before the burst or explosion of light. It's a time for reflective, still morning prayer, yet it can also be a somber darkness. It's a common time for morning surveillance-based raids. This is when the LA8 were, for instance, raided for bombs that have leveled buildings and wiped out whole families. But it's also firmly grounded in organic cycles and not in linearity. Like the horizon, a threshold between two supposed opposites that nevertheless wholly defies the binary, always fleeting, but also permanent in its repetition. It can simultaneously signify the somber silence of being forcibly uprooted and the hopeful possibilities of what movement and steadfastness may bring. It invites the fire of the sun, which is life-giving. In the horizon, we see the sky. In the sky, we see the horizon. It is then we are connected to the divine, to faith. So I give you some words from another member of the Palestinian Feminist Collective. You may know her, Eman Ghanayem, speaking about practices of solidarity that Ramadan inculcates. She recounts being a child gathering in the mosque for prayer. She says, I remember the muffled amins and how choked the adults got when the imam would pray for a liberated Palestine, for deliverance, for an end to violence, for victory, for peace, for health, for heaven. It was a cluster of words that even as a child I realized were repetitions meant to break through the many skies above us, to be heard and to be answered. And so in terms of our decolonial feminism, I was thinking about it being guided by the horizon of liberation, cyclically attached, and with the certainty that liberation will appear. My last keyword is not safety. It's not security nor even protection. And I say that because actually the previous one was what I was just going to mention. If you want to see more about why it's not safety, I encourage you to read Palestinian Feminist Collective, Feminist Praxis on Academic Freedom in a Time of Genocide in Gaza, and the link is in the document. But just thinking about the failures of the concept of safety throughout this genocide, to think about how it's been taken up even as a tool with which to bash and batter anti-genocide protests and protesters. And the other thing is that's not to say that I don't believe that we keep us safe. I do believe that, but I can say more later. So my last word is yearning. And so we return to love. The inspiration for this word comes from my youngest child, who during this past year of witnessing me rage and grieve, protest, and write and speak about genocide, asked me out of the blue one day, Mommy, do you want to go to Palestine? And it occurred to me that there's a whole universe of meaning in that question. Yearning seems like it is about loss, but it's actually oriented toward being reunited. We can yearn to be reunited with a person, with the land, and with an ideal or a vision. Yearning is about return, a return that can achieve redress, restoration, and liberation. And so in our efforts to bear witness, to tell the stories that will change the world, this is some artwork that my kids made. So that was why the description is in the slides. Am I like way over time? Okay, so I think it's the last-ish slide. toward a conclusion in our efforts to bear witness and to tell the stories that will change the world, we can only come up bereft. These stories do not end. They live in our bodies, in our minds, in our hearts. I shared Lara Albast's writing earlier, and I urge you to read the whole thing, as I cannot do it justice. And that's the same for all of the little snippets that I read. Here I share a section of Susan Abu Hawa's op-ed, Love in a Time of Genocide. She's, no, I didn't have a slide for it. It's just, she's in the process of describing also witnessing and talking to people and truth telling and writing about it and like the trying to do it justice. I'm not going to read all of it. I have more of it in the document, but she talks about how people, she asks them questions. Initially, they respond with the facts. And she says, I probe for details. What were you doing the moments before? What was the first thing you saw? The first thing you heard? What did it smell like? Was it dark or light outside? I nudge them to zoom into the molecular structure of every fact. The gravel in the mouth, dust in the lungs, the weight of something, the warm liquid running down the back, the twisted finger seen but not felt, the moment of realization, the waiting to be rescued, and the fear that no one will come, the ringing in the ears, the strange thoughts, the things that moved and the things that could not, the expectations of death and the wish that it be quick, the longing for life. So both those articles end, Lara Albast's and Susan Abu Hawa's, end without concluding. And of course, because we're still very much in the middle of everything, we cannot see the end, yet they nevertheless capture the steadfast longing for life. And it's a similar drive propelled by yearning that guides Sadiq Mahmoud's Love in a Time of Genocide. I'll also include the link. It's an essay that catalogs her exchanges about feminism and decolonial practice with Mona Amin, a feminist who's living in Gaza. And she talks about how practicing feminism in the midst of bearing witness to genocide is to embrace love as a radical consciousness, as a radical decolonial politic of fighting for life. And I connect this to Devin Atalla's Beyond Grief, Decolonial Love for Palestinian Life, in which she says, in times like this, love is the same word as presence, and presence is the same word as love. This kind of presence, writing and organizing while bearing witness, driven by the yearning for life and liberation, is what solidarity looks like, which was also the prompt. We are present to grief, to rage, when we are fully present witnesses to the unspeakable, incomprehensible, ongoing genocide, now in day 576. We also give life to the longing, the yearning for life and for freedom. Thank you.
That work for the. It's this chair? Okay. Okay. Put my big timer on. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you to Eman for organizing us. It's really quite overwhelming and an honor and a blessing to be on this panel.
I wanted to just reintroduce myself. My name is Marcelle Maese. I'm an associate professor of English, director of Women and Gender Studies, and that's my email if you want to get a hold of me. The title of my talk is Amor del Bueno, Decolonial Feminisms. And there's two main ideas that I want to share. One is that coalitions are real. They're very, very real. They save lives. We save what? We save lives. And two, Amor del Bueno is just to say that I want love, but I want the good kind of love, the healthy kind of love, because there's many different kinds of love, as I've come to understand. And so the first, coalitions are real. I want to just talk a little bit about Unión del Barrio. They've been organizing self-defense patrols against ICE since the 90s, and they've been so fundamental in Los Angeles and San Diego for organizing really anyone who wants to join any organization, how to spot ICE vehicles. And so this is one of the flyers that they educate us on, and it's self-defense community patrol volunteers that go out in the morning and let people know ICE is outside of your door. Don't come out, don't talk to them. You don't have to do this, you don't have to do that. And this is just a picture of the protests that we had on May 1st, and they're holding their banner. And I always love when people get a banner because it makes you feel real. So again, just that emphasis on coalitions are very real. We know when we're talking about abolish ICE, some of our communities have been saying that for decades. And so I think now in this moment, I think we hear it very differently when we get to that later when we talk about the deportation of our student activists. The second is Amor del Bueno. And so the main claim is many of us need to learn, practice, recontextualize, historicize, and or politicize love. Many of us take for granted that we know how to love and how to be loved. And so again, to denaturalize what that means and to really look at it again, study it again, recontextualize, relearn, repoliticized. And I'm grounding myself. There are many queer Chicana feminists who have theorized love and coalition. Of course, This Bridge Called My Back, Shuri Gloria, you should visit their work. And also Methodology of the Oppressed. Chela also organizes, what's happening with the mic here, talks about decolonial love. I'm going to be focusing on the way that Maria Lugones talks about loving perception. And it was hard for me to pick, what am I doing? Is this really, is it bad? I felt like it. Thanks for letting me know. Thank you. Okay, I feel like I'm going to sing or something now. Okay, so the reason why it was very hard for me to pick just one version of theorizing around love, something that I really love about Maria Lugones is she was really able to travel across the US-Mexican border and really cross that epistemic violence that border really offers. And she was able to create coalitions, many, many different coalitions, both in the US and throughout Latin America. So after many, many struggles, I decided to focus on her. I also wanted to situate my own work and the talk that I'm giving as queer Chicana feminisms, as decolonial feminisms, and some of our central claims is patriarchy is a colonial genocidal imposition. Chicana feminisms, as always, already abolitionists, as anti the nation state border, as open to the non-secular, the sacred, and the ancestral. And the decolonial, which has gone through many different names. So we've been internationalists, we've looked at internal colonialism, we looked at the third world, we look at US third world. And so now I'm glad to see I'm in company of getting to my keywords a little bit later in the talk. And the two words I'm gonna be talking about is oppression Olympics and loving perception. And so oppression Olympics is basically the opposite of love. Okay, and so I'm looking at these as very different things. And there's two people that I'm bringing together, two mujeres that I really love. Betita Martinez, an amazing organizer for decades. And then, of course, I already mentioned her, Maria Lugones. And the reason why I wanted to bring both of their works together is because Betita is very much a journalist, very much writing in that popular education, very, you can say, accessible. People like to call it accessible language. And then, Maria Lugones is our philosopher queen, just high, very abstract, very theoretical, and I like to claim both languages for our feminisms and for our decolonial feminisms. And I think it's good to speak many different languages. So I like to speak in popular education terms and also in theoretical terms. And so the first word that I'm looking at is oppression Olympics. And before I get to the actual definition that Betita offers us, I had all a script, and I'm working from memory, which is gonna give out at some point. And so again, I wanted to just give you an overview of Betita's work because I wanted to give you the 40 years of work that she is a part of before she gives us the term oppression Olympics. I'm kind of interested, have you all heard this term before? Do you use this term? Yes, okay. I see there's some nods here. And so again, just a little bit on Betita and who she was as an activist. Very early member of SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, from 1962 to 1968 officially, but she was always very much active and accompanying. And then in 1968, from 1973, she moves to New Mexico to become part of the Chicano movement there and is an editor of El Grito del Norte. And then through her moment in SNCC, she's very proactive in documenting SNCC. So these are some of the books. The movement, it's a photographic history of SNCC. She documents letters from Mississippi, people writing home about their experiences in the Freedom Summer Project. And then she also talks about her own, in 1961, she just decides to go to Cuba because there's just been a revolution there. And so again, just to give you the background that she has in Black civil rights, Black power, and international struggle. She was also very helpful in publishing Black Power and the Making of Black Revolutionaries, two extremely important books for understanding the colonial, the decolonial, and internationalisms. This is the paper that she edited, El Grito del Norte, that's coming out. I just wanted to go over some of the topics that El Grito covered. So for here, you have the comparison of Vietnam with our people. And so she's comparing the situation in Vietnam, the genocide happening in Vietnam, with what's happening in the barrios in Nuevo Mexico. The same paper is also really document all of the different tribal rights, different issues that are happening at the moment. So this one is in Washington. It's around fishing rights. Also, she's documenting, again, as the editor, Black Mesa rights with the Hopi and the Navajo. And also she's documenting Alcatraz. And also there was always documentation of police brutality. And so again, just to give you a background into this activist work that she's doing that's both internationalist and very much across the US. So this is one of our first official feminist anthologies, Sisterhood is Powerful, 1970. I think by 3 years later, it was like Sisterhood is no longer powerful or something. So it was a moment in time where this word was really claimed. And it's really interesting to look over who is in this anthology. And so Betita and the co-editors of El Grito del Norte happen to be the only two Chicanas, and very few women of color are actually in this anthology. And again, one of the things I wanted to point to is that in their chapter, I wanted to put up the whole index. It's really fascinating when you look at how they organize this anthology. They were really putting Chicana feminisms, women of color feminisms within a colonial context. And so there was already a kind of a critique of sisterhood in this book. And so what Betita writes is the white middle class women's liberation movement has little gut understanding of the position of women from a colonized, not merely oppressed group. And so you have this introduction of colonialism, and also the insistence on, for the women of color colonized group, even the most political, her oppression as a woman is usually overshadowed by the common oppression of both male and female. Black and brown people in this country are fighting for survival against the physical genocide of wars, including a high draft rate, police brutality, hunger, and deprivation. And so all this kind of prefaces her work, her internationalist work, her work in the feminist movement, in the Chicano movement, in the Black movement. When she gets to, in the late 90s, in this book, is when she writes about the term Oppression Olympics. And she says, quote, "The oppressed have always survived by becoming experts on the oppressor's ways, but that can become a prison of sorts, a trap of compulsive vigilance. Let us liberate ourselves then from the tunnel vision of whiteness and behold the many colors around us." And so this is kind of a preface to loving perception. And so to understand something that Maria Lugones will talk about is to see each other not only in our oppression, but to see each other in our resistance and in our creativity. And again, she talks about here, by this time, she's very much working to advocate for an understanding of race that is not bound to a black and white binary. And she's also very much advocating for a kind of inter-indigeneity or intertribal or expansive understanding of indigeneity across the Americas. And she says, for a Latina to urge recognizing a variety of races models, it's not and should not be yet another round in oppression Olympics. We don't need more competition among different social groups for the gold medal of the most oppressed. And this is kind of funny. I know I'm not saying it funny, but it's kind of hilarious. Okay, so I'm not feeling particularly funny at the moment just because I feel the moment is very heavy. But again, I won't get to it. But Maria Lugones also talks about a kind of sense of humor and also kind of playfulness. So when we use this term, there's a little bit of irony here as well that we're mentioning. She talks a lot. I think I'm going to go over these slides. And so one of the things that she says is the commonalities begin with history, which reveals that again and again, peoples of color have one experience in common: European colonization and or neo-colonialism with its accompanying exploitations. And again, to think about what this means and I'm going to show a couple of pictures. For me, I kept putting the pictures in and taking the pictures out because I felt they were very heavy. And I don't know why I felt the urge to be light. But this is just where I am. And so again, when we think about our students who are being targeted for their political activism, and I want to say their names. I was working from memory. So when we think about, and they're different subject positions, they're different locations, and really the planetary conditions that represent all of their work. So Mahmoud Khalil, who is Palestinian, born in Syria; Yanson Chung, South Korean; Romisi Öztürk, Turkish; Badarkan Suri, Indian; Mamdouh Tal. Again, thinking about how our calls to abolish ICE sound very different in this context. Thinking about those of us who have been in conversation, have been trying to create change around the attack on our students. It was very shocking to me to realize that the disappearance of 43 students from Ayotzinapa happened in 2014. So that's over 11 years ago. I also wanted to commemorate today is a memorialization for missing and murdered Indigenous women, missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. And again, I wanted to show this artwork that really brings together, for those of us who have been organizing against feminicidio throughout Mexico, with just the alarming rates of 10 women a day being disappeared. And so I wanted to just pause here and ask, again, when we talk about solidarity and we talk about feminism, and going back to this idea of expanding our understanding, what kinds of frameworks do we need for understanding race and immigration? What kinds of curriculum, what kinds of coalitions, and what kinds of art? Because I was so thankful to find the art. It was really empowering for me to see there's so much artwork that really connects our struggles across time and across the hemisphere, really, across the planet. And so again, I want to pause and think about those of us who have been abolitionists for a very long time, who have been looking at solidarity with Palestine and the Americas, and to really welcome people in. For those of you who are newly really understanding the power of ICE, that power of deportation, the power of those detention centers. And I want to welcome you in and also ask you to think about how it is that you are able to see to see these subjects, to see those of us that are in struggle. And I want to suggest that you, again, now turning to the loving perception, the loving eye is, quote, the eye of one who knows that to know the scene, one must consult something other than one's own will and interests and fears and imagination. And so for me, I'm overwhelmed. It was even hard for me to put these pictures together. I was overwhelmed by fear, anxiety, anger. And so I think it's really important to not let that control our perception of others. And we have to again understand that fear, and it's right, it's a good fear in a sense, because we do have to be careful in this moment, but also to not stay in that fear when looking at others. And so I wanted to now turn to, and I'm aware of the time, to Maria Lugones. She's very much a part of a decolonial feminist tradition, and I'll leave it to those to read that. But the part that I want to talk about, I think for me, she talks about the relation. She says basically in Loving Perception, she talks about the failure of her ability to love her mother. And I want to just remark that every time I read this, it's really un escándalo to say, I don't love my mother well, or I need to love my mother better, because I think it's a relationship that's very romanticized, very normal, very normalized. And she says that my failure to love my mother is very much similar to the failure of women of color to love each other, and for white women to love across different types of race and cultural experience. And so she describes why she was unwilling as a child to really understand what it meant to love in a loving way. And she says, I was disturbed by not wanting to be what she was. I had a sense of not being quite integrated. Myself was missing because I could not identify with her. I could not see myself in her. I could not welcome her world. I saw myself as separate from her, a different sort of being, not quite of the same species. She says, I was unwilling to be like her and thought that identifying with her, seeing myself in her, necessitated that I become like her. And so through a process of really her process of becoming women of color in the United States, remember she's coming from Argentina, she learns to fall in love again with women of color feminism, with feminisms, with decolonial feminisms. And she learns that to love her mother meant, quote, she is not exhausted by the mainstream colonial patriarchy construction of her. I came to realize that there are worlds in which she shines as a creative being. She says, to love her meant to consult something other than my own will and interest and fears and imagination. And finally, to love her meant to see both of us as we are constructed in her world, that I witness her own sense of herself from within her world. So again, a kind of closing definition around loving perception and coalition and solidarity. So solidarity requires a loving perception that consults something other than my own will and interests and fears and imagination. Beyond the colonial construction of quote unquote victims as pliable, foldable, file awayable, classifiable, decolonial love sees, quote, lively beings, resistors, constructors of visions, not fixed in a particular construction, but here creatively. And so with that, I want to end my talk and thank you. And I look forward to questions and dialogue. Thank you.
I like how when you invite feminists, they always give you more than you ask for. Like it's just abundance. This is more than I asked for. You exceed my expectations. The professor. So I'm kind of taking the role of, or continuing the role of moderator. I do want to ask a question, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. And And I know that probably people have questions about some of the technical things that were discussed, like, and Marcelle really put it well when she said, you know, thinking about frameworks and arts and coalitions and lessons and these things, these material manifestations of a feminist belief or principle, the praxis of feminism, right? You also brought up material violences like the genocide in Palestine, the US-Mexico border, ICE, and abolishing ICE, the continuing violence against indigenous communities on these lands, including the continuing violence toward indigenous women who remain in so many ways invisible or invisibilized. I'm gonna ask kind of a very like literature person question, and so feel free to just be like, this question does not make sense. I am gonna leave the technical stuff to like, I'm gonna leave like, what does feminism can do to us now, to just ask a question that kind of touches on the political, but also in relationship to the personal. I just finished reading with my students Angela Davis's Freedom is a Constant Struggle, and she has like these amazing quotations. I think in her final or chapter before the last, where she talks about, you know, the personal and the political is, or the relationship between the two is perhaps one of the biggest connections that feminism gives us in understanding our world. So the question I want to ask is, you know, Katie, your keywords were matrilineality, gratitude, and reciprocity. What do you do in the absence of these things? Like, what do you do in the absence of mothers, in the absence of blessings, in the absence of givers? So how do you fill the space when these key terms are not existing in the moment, you know? And you can say, you know, you can question the question itself, but I guess I'm coming in with this, you know, Palestinian dread and apocalyptical feeling around everything, you know? And so what do you do in the absence of, when you talk about reciprocity, that someone else has to exist? What if that person does not exist or is not present? Amira, your keywords were cultivate, horizon, and yearning. Kind of asking the same question, what do you do in the absence of a soil that can grow what you're cultivating? I really enjoyed how you talked about horizon in these kind of as a meeting point of, this is how I read it at least, but in the meeting point of sometimes opposites or contradictions, or, and so the sky can bring us the sun, you know, and the sun appears a lot in Arabic poetry, right? As dawn, dawn brings liberation, but also the sky brings bombs. So what do you do in the absence of a horizon? And in terms of yearning, or whether it's felt or real, right? And what do you do in the absence of gratification, of a heart that meets the feeling that you put forward in these moments of yearning? Marcelle, your presentation had so many words that are really inspiring, and so I think I'm gonna focus on the two main ones, I guess, and you know, what do you do in the presence of competition and Olympics and overwhelm, right? And what do you do in the absence of an eye or a heart that can perceive you lovingly? Hope that makes sense.
I'm going to try to answer it sideways a little bit, but also to talk about solidarity, because I didn't have it in my slides. I wasn't sure. I wanted to save something for the Q&A part, sometimes I get nervous public speaking. So I want to say a little bit about how I approach solidarity, which I hope will also help get at your point, which I think for me, the reason I chose these words is they're words and ideas and honestly like ways of being or more verby than nouny. And that's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. Like, you know, I'm trying to relearn my language. It's really hard. And a lot of my own, even as a very privileged, white presenting, middle class Cherokee person, there's just so much loss of culture and family stories for a variety of reasons. But in our culture, like many you know, our own language, like many languages indigenous to the Americas or North America, I'm not as I know mine's. Anyway, I'll digress. Anyway, is the emphasis on verbs over nouns. And I keep thinking about that in this moment, right? Like that, what does a verb do? And maybe it's because I'm a literature person that a noun doesn't, right? And an attachment to nouns versus verbs. And then a verb is the action and it's the relationship with another, even if that other might not receive what you're saying, right? And so I guess I want to kind of get at it sideways by talking about how I approach solidarity as specifically me. And in ways it's because of some of the frustrations I feel with certain lacks of or things that I feel particularly accountable to. So as a white privileged Cherokee person and given the legacies of enslavement and anti-Blackness in my community, I feel especially responsible and accountable to Black feminists and Black feminism in all of the possible forms that I can think about that. And as an Indigenous futurist to Black futurism, that's like critical for me. Because for me, that is a way of offering reciprocity that is needed in order to do the kinds of repair and attend to the harm that people in my community have enacted against each other historically, right? And I also think about what it means to be a Southeastern Native person here, right? And like the legacy of San Diego and not to be dark, but I was thinking about it driving up to this campus, you know, and the fact that you can see, you know, the Presidio from here, and we're not far from the mission. And in many ways, we're so on the pulse of a kind of colonial violence that even is so distinct from my communities, I still struggle to fully understand what California Native people endured, right? And I think of some of the stories friends tell me. Again, I'm a literature professor, not a statistician, but something like 9 out of 10 California Native people died or were murdered in the statehood era. Like just to sit with that, right? And that means people's relatives that were maybe one generation before the great grandmother I showed on the screen for California Native people. It's so profound. I try to hold that every day in everything I do because there's something about being on part of the land here, right? That is really important in that way. And so I just, that's important to me. And that the history is less important to the incredible things that Kumeyaay and California Native people are doing now. And what are the ways that in all forms of solidarity, I can ground myself in those two things. Because for me, the specificity of who I am, that's really important to me, even in my solidarity with anything happening, right? Like, how do I think about that as like the core part of my sense of gratitude and reciprocity? So I guess for me, I'm not looking for gratitude or reciprocity. I see that as my job as an Indigenous feminist, if that makes any sense. Like, I see gratitude as something that we appreciate the gifts that were maybe not even intentionally offered to us, and reciprocity as not requiring something transactional in return in that way. So, you know, another word I thought about using is a Cherokee word, gadugi, which basically means doing something for the greater social good that will not benefit you personally, right? Which is not really something that we think about in the US right now, and expects no gratitude or reciprocity. So I guess in choosing those words, that's part of why I chose them. What is it, for me personally, what does it mean to be an Indigenous feminist that does not ask of, but tries to move through? I don't know if that makes any sense. And so I do think it's always difficult times, but you know, while I just said my doom and gloom about being here, there's also amazing things happening, right? Like, and there's an incredible anthology of Southern California Native women that was just released less than, 2 years ago, of incredible young Kumeyaay and Pyongyangweecham women who are writing poetry, who are writing songs, who are making baskets, who are creating art and being celebratory and glorious. And so I try to sit with that too. Anyway, that was too long. I apologize.
Really luxurious. Like we said earlier, too many mics, not enough MCs. I'm stalling because I don't have an answer to this really amazing prompt because I thought my keywords were foolproof. I'm going to be honest. Like, not really. I didn't think they were foolproof, but cultivate, horizon and yearning all have within them already the acknowledgement of like the possibility of not being present or loss, and they're moving toward the constantly moving toward the building of it or the creating of it or the presence of it or the growing of it, right? The cultivating of it, and yearning especially is like already saying that it's not there. So the idea was you come together in collectives around that. You come together in rage and grief to build toward that, and that's part of what both brings you together and also propels you to create. But I mean, if you don't have the soil, you don't have the soil, right? It's and that's also very a true thing, a reality. So I think what it made me think of, however, I don't know. So this now I'm just saying things that are, I have no idea where they will lead. But what it made me think of was the other day when I was at the rally, the May Day rally in Chicano Park, I saw a sign that said, despair is a luxury. And I couldn't disagree more, actually. Like it was like it's a luxury we can't afford. But I don't know if that means we are not allowed to have despair, then I reject that idea. Because how can we not have despair? I mean, how can we not feel despair? So I guess that's sort of like where I went. It's like, don't deny it. Let's not pretend like we don't have these deep moments of despair and feelings of despair. And the things that can guide us or that we can look to are, like in the keywords, the horizon. But I think we need to give ourselves those moments of despair as well. I don't see how we can't. And another thing that I thought of after I thought of that, I'm sorry, no shade to the person who had that sign. Like I also understand what it's saying. I'm not trying to like say something mean about the sign, but I think I often have this kind of like, what you want me? You still, and I have to be denied that, like, and you want more from me because I feel like I want to also give us that, like, luxury. I guess if it is a luxury to feel despair, then let's take it. But it also made me think of an essay by Alicia Elliott when she writes an essay about, and I don't remember her nation, but she talks about learning her language and talking to her sister who knows the language better about the word for depression. And then she asks her sister, like, what is this word? Like, what does it mean? Really, like if you break it down. And her sister says it means like literally broken down, a mind spread out on the ground. And she talks in that essay about how that's so much more descriptive than the word depression, which is like to press something down. But this idea of your mind being scattered, like spread out on the ground. And so it made me think of that as well. Like, this is also true. And it just is.
Yes, and that was a hard question, but thank you. And I think for me, it really is the reason I wanted to pair kind of both, again, now I can laugh more because I'm done with my talk, because I was a lot more nervous. But just the Oppression Olympics is supposed to make you smile a little, kind of laugh at yourself a little bit, at taking yourself so seriously. But I think just persistence in death is very important. I think sitting still is often very important. I think some days is just I'm still alive. I'm still here. And more importantly, I want to be here and I want to be alive. So I think that is very, very important. I think that in all of it made me when you were talking about growing up so close to your land but not being able to be there, I think to me that was very heartbreaking. And the way you were talking about the tree and the seeds, and I think of Juarez, it's just dirt. It really is just dirt. Nothing really grows in Juarez. And so I think there can be an absence of soil, but there's never an absence of heart to perceive love. I think again, this persistence in death is understanding relationships go beyond death and cultivating that. And so there's always a heart to perceive you in love, and sometimes it's just yourself. But these days, no. And so part of my exhaustion is, again, those of us that were at that march. It was really amazing. Just people were so happy to be together, but also understanding the very scary time that we're in. And so that's part of my exhaustion, is this thrill of seeing again. That's why I started off with those self-defense community people. It's really anyone who wants to do that work. You just show up. If you can wake up at 4:30 in the morning and get out there, you're welcome, you know? And so it's that exhaustion of I'm angry, I'm scared, but then really seeing like the past 20 years of organizing in the United States coming to something. So it's not all those different movements. I didn't mention them to shame us. I never want to shame anyone, but just saying we've been working on this. We've been working on the violence against our students, the incarcerating of our people, the destruction of our earth and our water. We've been doing this work. And we're in a very different moment now, very scary moment. But that's why I'm welcoming everyone in who is getting here. And I see so many new faces, new people who are participating. I don't think I answered your question, but that's what I felt to speak.
Getting this back. Okay. So we want to open it up for anyone who wants to ask a question, comment, share thoughts and feelings, talk about feminism and other stuff. And I'll be walking around until I see a hand up. That's my role.
Hi, good evening. I wanted to start by thanking you all for such a thought-provoking and powerful presentation. There's nothing like starting off your Monday with just powerful women, you know? So thank you for that. Specifically, I wanted to address my comment to Marcel. I really wanted to thank you for bringing up like el amor del bueno, and especially just like the loving perception and bringing that into the work that we do, because oftentimes we'd like to think that love is like a given and not something that we have to work on. And I really appreciated you bringing in Chicanx philosophy, but also movements from Indigenous women and Black women, and it like shows the collective work. And I just like really wanted to echo that, and thank you for sharing that with us tonight.
Hello, thank you. Thank you very much for your wonderful presentations, thought-provoking, and sometimes we are so accustomed to hear love in the context of advertising and this superfluous romantic love, right? But this is such a deep connection to also the caring and the practices of care. And all of you talk about it, talk about a way of practicing something every day that cares for you and for those around you and the world. And my question maybe for all of you is that given that we have been handed this apocalypse scenario in international politics and in national politics and white male, white patriarchy is obsessed with putting us in this end of the times, end of the world moment. So how will you carry on those practices of love and care? How can we all carry those on in this moment and beyond? And that'll be my question.
I think your keyword, abundance, actually speaks to that. And I think the turn to abundance has been about that, your question, in terms of, I don't know why I grabbed the mic because I really don't know what I was going to say. I think I was going to try to pass it to you if I'm really being honest with myself. But I think one thing is to think of it in terms of that turn toward abundance is about, as we know from sort of maybe following it, that all these end times forces want us to consistently focus on scarcity and think that that's the framework. I think you also mentioned this. I think that that's the framework that we have to work from. And so what I'm saying is the turn toward abundance, but the thinkers who have, and feminist thinkers, mostly, and I was wondering about the book Planetary Abundance, whether it made me, your comments made me think of that book by Candace Fujikane. But that framing it in relation to abundance helps us keep trained on, I don't know, trained's not the best word, but keep us, persistently focused on the fact that we are already always sort of doing these practices, as you mentioned, of care, extending webs of care and mutual aid that were also mentioned, that these are already part of the fabric of how we move through the world, and they are already about creating and perpetuating abundance if we shift the frame. So I think this shift is part of it, and focus in knowing, remembering, and thinking about what we're already doing in that respect, and then like we're doing great.
Okay, I'll try. Like similar. I'm like I'm just gonna talk as I think, which is it's 50-50 how that's gonna go. But yeah, I was definitely thinking of the Fujikani, and I've been sitting with that a lot, especially when I decided to have the Miley Arvin quote up there, because I think, I'll say the thing that gets said a lot, but I think is true and has come up in a number of conversations I've had with different people, which is for Black and Indigenous people on this continent, like this is not the first apocalypse, like this is not the first, and we were not decolonized before 2024. And so I keep that in perspective, which is one reason I really love that Arvin quote, where it can feel, it's something I've shared with a number of feminist friends, and honestly Palestinian feminist friends. I feel like if I haven't sent it to you in the last year, consider yourself lucky, because I send it to everyone, because I think what she's asking of us is to imagine a decolonial future we might not see, right? But that you still have to feed and care for elders and children is such a profound refusal of I appreciate you said, like there is something really necessary about grief and despair, but there's also something really powerful about not letting that be the whole story. And so I guess that's what I sit with, is trying, again, to think of a sustainable way to manage things, because, you know, in addition to it being Missing and Murdered Indigenous Peoples Day, Wednesday is the 1-year anniversary of our students at UCSD being arrested, right? And having an enormous law enforcement presence on that campus. And one of the rumors and fears that day was people had heard that ICE was there as well, right? And so all of these things are threaded together. You know, there's a reason certain things happen the way they do, I believe, in San Diego, and it is tethered to these much deeper histories that the land is carrying and that we're a part of, whether or not we want to be. So I guess for me, I hold on to those things. Like, I want to work towards something I will probably never see, and I want to celebrate in that. And I want to think of all the people who did the same for myself. I guess that was one reason I decided to show those pictures is, you know, I think about the things like Nellie probably went through in her life, like the profound loss, like just the profound loss of like your nation doesn't exist anymore. And now you're part of a state that, you know, is just going to like railroad through everything you've ever known after your family, you know, were forcibly removed from their ancestral homelands. But there's joy in her holding my mom, right? And in being in that little space. And so I guess that's what I sit with, is like, I don't know. I mean, we don't know what the future holds, but at least the things I think about from the feminists that I really admire is we will still find laughter. We will still tell bad jokes. We will give ourselves the time to grieve and mourn. But that it's a future that it's, I don't know, that it's okay for it to be a future. And I guess that's also the other thing I've been doing, is just throwing myself into the Indigenous Futures Institute, which for us is very committed to believing in Black Indigenous futures, because that is a future for all life. You know, I mean that in a kind of global way. And so for me, at least, that's really been my investment, is like, what a rebuke to continue to imagine that we're going to have futures. Like, I personally find power in that. And yeah, I don't know. That's my little contribution.
Thank you. So I think also, again, just returning to this idea of sitting still, of being persistent. And I think for me, I really tried to come into my sweetness. And so a joke I've been telling, when, you know, when people they write in your high school book, stay sweet, how profound and like how much wisdom there really was in that. And just thinking about all the demands on not being a sensitive person, not being sweet, not being loving. It's constant. There's a constant idea of scarcity. And so for me, it's kind of just been, okay, maybe I can't do that in this space or with this person, but there always is someone that I can be completely romantic with or loving, or I like to give little gifts. I like things that smell good. You know, I carry little oils. And so I just think this persistence of just staying in what makes you survive and what makes you happy and what makes you loving. And, you know, it happens if you just, you know, stay alive long enough and just really look for that in other people. So that's part of the self-care. And then it's, you know, then there's just like the obvious things that are really hard to do, like sleeping and eating, which is a constant battle for me. It's just really so difficult. But some of these things are kind of very basic. And so just being able to, you know, sleep, I think is very important. It's probably because all those years I didn't sleep. So now my body's just like, we're going to sleep. So I hope that answers your question. But again, I think if you're persistent enough, I think in what it is that you want that keeps you healthy and politicized, I do think that you do find others that are doing the same work, always.
Was have a good summer.
Very wise.
Thank you. I didn't really know what to expect when I came, and I've been at a 3-day meeting of the Jewish Voice for Peace, as has Octavio there, and which was very intense, and there were some amazing women there, Cori Bush and Rashida Tlaib and Amy Goodman, and like all my heroes, and Naomi Klein. But I wanted to sort of come back to something that Stan Rodriguez, who is a Kumeyaay educator, leader, in San Diego, said, everyone's indigenous somewhere. And I've been really thinking about that because, first of all, I'm thinking I could make an escape to Ireland if I need to, because I have, I think, the necessary paperwork, and you only need one grandparent. But also just how does one deal with this sense? I think part of, maybe you could tell me what you think of this. Part of what I sense is that the issue about the damage that colonialists do is because they come into a place where they are not connected to the land, because people whose land it is would never harm the land like they do, right? And that sense of, I'm wondering whether, that sense of actual connection to the physicality of the being, and I don't know if that's a luxury. That's what I've been trying to grapple with in the places where people don't have connection to actual land so much. How do you maintain that love of the land and that love of place and earth?
Okay, I turned it off and then I had to turn it back. Thank you for that question. I think about this all the time. So I would say, and I think about it too as someone who, I'm from what's currently called Oklahoma. Many of us were forced there, right? That's not necessarily the land that we have relationships with, like in that way, the land we have a relationship with, we've had a relationship with for like over 13,000 years. But I think about it slightly differently in that I in conversations with many friends, which is that I think anyone can have a relationship with the land in that way, right? Like, and I don't think this is what you're saying. This is just my like teaching way of talking about it. So I'm kind of cheating that way. Is like, there's not some secret trick that Indigenous people in the Americas have of like, we have some like mystical, I mean, perhaps, but even if we did in certain situations, I would not share it publicly here. But the way I describe it to my students and how I really feel, and this is something that, people who have a lot of knowledge in my community remind us, is like, we're talking about thousands of years of science. It's just having a deep understanding of a place that you know and have known for time immemorial. A Kumeyaay friend of mine always reminds us that if you go to La Jolla, there are Kumeyaay village is so old, they are under the water there, right? Like, that's how long people have been here. And so it's just, to me, pragmatism. If you've lived somewhere for like over 10,000 years, you really know it. You know how to be in relation to it. And so I do think that there is space for everyone I'll get at it another way. Like, when I'm teaching literature or Indigenous studies, I try to tell my students there's room for everyone in Indigenous intellectual traditions. I think, at least in the Americas, I don't want to speak globally in that way, but there's a protocol for everyone, whether or not you're Indigenous. And being Indigenous doesn't mean you like get out of stuff and you're like, haha, I have a relationship to the land, so I don't have to feel any sense of, any kind of bad affects or anything. It's often more about having a deep sense of responsibility, right? It's not necessarily a space of privilege, but a sense of responsibility and reciprocity and accountability. So I think to your point, yes, I do think there's like a desire and a yearning for that, as if there's like, but I also wonder how much of that is also like the kind of possessive and property logics that are so much about this space, right? I've talked to multiple colleagues at UCSD, which has a very longstanding bad relationship with the Kumeyaay community who don't want to feel bad working there. I guess my question is, but why is it about feelings? Like maybe we should feel bad here. This school is still here, you know? And kind of, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that helps sort of get at it in that way. And I think also to kind of go back to the point of this panel, you know, one thing I think about as well, and we've had conversations, I think, along these lines that are connected that led me to an idea and preparing for this panel, which is I feel like one reason I personally have found a lot of kinship with Palestinian feminists in particular too, is that there's also an absence of the propertiedness, this like idea of being able to someday own land. Now that's not to say, you know, I own a home in San Diego, I'm privileged in that way, but I'm talking about something a little different, right? I'm talking about a patriarchal ability to own something, to have land be the thing that you get to have. And I do think feminist solidarity offers us a way to try and unthink that relationship, right? If that helps think through that at all, right? Because there's also, we've seen in the last 10 years, weaponization of the idea of it being indigenous. Like anyone can be indigenous in a way that can actually produce different kinds of violence. And so I guess that's why I started with the point that I may be an indigenous person, but I have profound responsibilities to many other people. It doesn't give me any kind of like, you know, it doesn't change the terms upon which I have to be a moral person. I don't know if that helps or if I'm rambling. I apologize. I think about this a lot.
I would just add two, I think, somewhat quick things. One is a colonial relationship is like an absence of relationship, I think is sort of how you put it. But I think we could add, as really wonderful decolonial Latina theorists have talked about, extraction and extractivism. I think that is important to add to that's the key piece of colonialism that is an attitude of like perceiving a thing as something to be extracted, right? And to get the resources from. So this is one thing that's important. It's not just like, oh, there's no relationship there. It's that the relationship is one of extraction. And the other thing I would say is that we learn about land and the love of land and how to be on it, and through stories and through we learn it, right? So in that respect, also, I think it's not like this sort of naturalized thing or something that you either have or you don't have. It's like still, it's possible to listen to stories and to understand, to gain an understanding through that about this kind of way of perceiving of land as the first teacher, as you know, as not as property, as not as something to be owned, these kinds of things.
Hi. Wow, this is a lot of voice. It's a lot of voice. My God. I just want to thank you each. I want to thank all four of you and John, just for the pleasure and privilege it was just to be in this moment, in this relation with you guys. And it just felt like such a gift to be able to experience the space and that beautiful complication of navigating that with each of you. And I just want to really convey that. I think to sort of have one moment to think about this, I really appreciated thinking about how these frameworks are so embedded for us, right? We're so often embedded in these moments. I was thinking back through the African feminist Oyeroke Oyewumi, who thinks often like we're so trapped in our own embodiments that we often can't see outside of these frames. And I really appreciate the way that you have begun to sort of give us the sort of work of thinking beyond those frames. And so if I were to just ask one small question, then is we've made gestures toward these joys and thinking about how we're going to live in the middle of these things. And so what might be a moment and a space for you all as we are dealing with so much heaviness, as we're dealing with so much rage, as we're dealing with so much hope and continuity? Where is a moment right now where there is the potential for a joy for you right now in the midst of this that is bringing you a joy? Yeah.
It is on. Okay. We like to turn it off before we start talking. It's really right. It's now. It's just seeing you. Honestly, when I saw you, I was like, I'm glad you're here. You know, I'm glad you came back. I did not know that. I did not know that. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's always like right there. Always. Even with myself, I tell myself like jokes no one else is gonna laugh at. And I make myself laugh all the time, you know? And it's hard with teaching because my humor is so dark. So that's the only place where I'm very kind of, you know, I don't want to scare anyone. But I laugh at things I probably shouldn't laugh at. And so I think it's just always there. In the same way that fear and violence, there's always there. I think that joy is always there too. And again, I also think it's the space in that you're in. So really for me, this is just being here with you all and seeing who's here and that this is happening. It's very important and makes me laugh in some ways too, or smile, I should say. And the comment was, well, what if my yearbook only said have a good summer? I think that's also very wise, by the way, because we're academics and you know what we think the summer is supposed to be. And we never just say, oh, let's have a good summer. It's always the summer is here.
I mean, I will just say probably the same thing. I have, I, the tangible moments have, for me, have been like making zines the other day, or, yeah, coming together, creating a space and then like building toward it and then actually being there and people show up and you create something together. Those are the times that, that have been, and that's what, honestly, that's the only thing that has made me believe like what I wrote in my comments. Because when I'm not, I read the prompt for this panel and I was like, wow, I love this prompt. I want to hear somebody else talk about this. What can I possibly say that will respond to this? So yeah, so it was like, sometimes I feel like I have been, and that's, I guess, why I leaned so much, I brought so many other people into the conversation. So that was my way of starting to replicate that, like bringing all people into the room and uplifting the things that I have read over the course of this past year that also made me feel like deeply. They just made me feel deeply. And that's a kind of presence and a being present. That was the gift. I'll just say quickly, I'm sorry. I cried several times while I was preparing these comments. And it was good. It was a good cry, like, you know.
No, I agree. I told you I cried rereading that quote. I was like, what is wrong with me? This is a Duke University press book. Like, what am I doing? I would say yes to all of those things. I mean, I think just being with people and, you know, like, I like, as you know, I'm a fan of horror, so I think about this a lot, the tension between joy and violence, right? And it's why I'm a horror fan. It's like how I manage it. But I think just being with people, there's such power in being together, and I think especially we're still, you know, there's so much grief from COVID, I think for so many people in the ways that it touched so many of our communities. And coming together and laughing, I think, and feeling strength is so powerful because it strikes me that one of the desires right now is to isolate people, to make people feel afraid to come together, especially in public spaces. And so just the power of being there with each other and like weird fleshy bodies, you know, doing what we do is, I don't know, it's amazing. And poetry for sure, always, all day, every day.
By way of concluding, and also maybe talking or saying something or last thing about joy, this is going to be a weird way of doing it, but I've been thinking a lot about hell recently, like the idea of hell, because of, and it's all interesting because we don't see people from here. We just see like the light, and it looks like a divine intervention sort of coming from the skies. But I've been thinking a lot about hell because it repeats in political language. For instance, describing Gaza as hell, whether it's from the Zionist side of describing it, we're going to turn it into a hell, or from the Palestinian side of the narrative. But it's always been used to describe, you see the pattern, for instance, when you read like Leonard Peltier's memoir, for instance, who was finally released recently this year. He describes the prison as a hell, and a lot of Palestinian prisoners describe it as well as hell. And so thinking about what are the manifestations of the opposite of that, of heaven. And you see that in the language the Palestinians use to describe life after death and possibility. And even, you know, this year also, I think this month, and the teaching we did last week with poet Lina Tufaha, she mentioned that there's an anthology coming out this year by all Palestinian poets titled Heaven Looks Like Us, and which I really like that title. By way of concluding, I want to invoke this Arabic proverb that it would rhyme in Arabic, so I'm going to say it in Arabic. It goes, الجنة بدون ناس ما بتنداس. So you hear the rhyme, and it translates to heaven without people is uninhabitable. And so I want to thank our guests today for giving us a piece of heaven in their company. Thank you all so much for being here. And share the love.